The old barn creaked with the weight of silence. Dust floated through beams of golden light that slipped between warped wooden slats. In the center of the dirt ring stood Frostmane, a powerful chestnut stallion with faded scars along his flank. His posture was proud, unmoving, but his dark, intelligent eyes held something deeper, a quiet story, buried under years of mystery. Around him, ranchers leaned against the rails, their hats pulled low, their expressions unreadable. None of them trusted what they were looking at, but none could look away. From the auctioneer's platform, Gaëtan Rousseau cleared his throat. "Strong build, solid bloodline, and still got fight left in him," he said, trying to inject energy into the room. But the crowd remained hesitant. Whispers had circled for weeks. This horse had a past. Thibaut Carrière, a shrewd buyer known for flipping horses for profit, raised his paddle. 5,000. The others stood silent. Then, the barn doors moaned open behind them, as if the building itself sensed something was about to change. A man in a dark hooded cloak stepped inside. His boots echoed with eerie calm against the wood floor as he made his way through the rows. He didn't speak until he reached the ring. Then, with a single raised hand, he said, 6,000. His voice was low, controlled, too calm for a bidding war. Thibaut narrowed his eyes, annoyed. 7. Without hesitation, the hooded man replied, 10,000. The room shifted. Heads turned. That was far more than anyone expected Frostmane to go for. No one else raised a bid. Gaëtan gave one final glance around. 10,000 going once, twice, sold. His gavel struck hard, sealing the deal. But the crowd wasn't celebrating. All eyes followed the stranger as he stepped into the ring. Frostmane didn't flinch. In fact, the horse lowered his head, slowly, cautiously, like he recognized the scent of a man he thought was gone forever. A hush settled over the barn. Something unspoken passed between them. Gaëtan hesitated, then asked the formal question, "Name for the record, sir?" Silence lingered before the man slowly pulled back his hood. A collective gasp swept through the barn. His face was older, lined with time and loss, but unmistakable. Several men stepped back in shock. A woman in the corner dropped her clipboard. "It's Aloy Trembley," someone whispered. The name spread like wildfire. Aloy had vanished 20 years ago without a trace. And Frostmane? He was the horse Aloy rode the morning he disappeared. No one moved. The air inside the barn felt thick, as if time itself had stopped. Aloy Trembley stood in full view now, the years carved into his face like the cracks on the barn walls. For 2 decades, rumors of his disappearance had swirled through the region. Some said he'd run off, others whispered of darker ends. But here he was, flesh and bone, standing beside the very horse he vanished with. Frostmane stood quietly by his side, not needing a rope, not needing control. As if waiting. From the corner, Maëlys Fortier, the auction's record-keeper, recovered her clipboard but couldn't take her eyes off Aloy. She remembered him from childhood. Her father had worked his ranch once. Seeing him again was like seeing a ghost with eyes that still held pain. Gaëtan Rousseau, unsure whether to speak, finally asked the question hovering in everyone's mind. "Where have you been, Aloy?" The barn held its breath. But Aloy said nothing. Instead, he rested a weathered hand on Frostmane's neck, his thumb tracing the line of an old scar. Outside, the crowd was already growing. Word had spread like wildfire through the town. Trucks were pulling up, neighbors and strangers alike stepping out, whispering to one another in disbelief. Thibaut Carrière, still holding his bid card, pushed through the crowd with a sour scowl. "What kind of stunt is this?" he barked. "You disappear for 20 years, and now you show up at an auction like it's nothing?" He looked at Aloy with a mixture of anger and suspicion. "Where the hell did you go, Trembley?" Aloy turned to him slowly, his voice calm but firm. "You always talk too much, Thibaut. A few in the crowd chuckled nervously. But beneath Aloy's composed surface, something darker flickered in his eyes, something unfinished. He wasn't just here for the horse. He was here because something needed to be said, or maybe finally revealed. Maelys, sensing the tension rising, stepped forward. "Aloy, maybe you should come inside. Get off your feet. People have questions." As Aloy followed her out of the ring, whispers trailed behind him. "Is it really him? He hasn't aged as much as I thought. Where did Frostmane come from?" Inside the office, Maelys poured him water and sat across the desk. "We thought you were dead, Aloy," she said gently. "A lot of people grieved." Aloy stared at the cup, not drinking. "I know," he said quietly. "But I couldn't come back, not until now." In the distance, unseen by the others, a lone truck parked at the edge of the property. Behind the wheel sat Osric Dunleavy, watching. Through the dusty windshield of his truck, Osric Dunleavy remained perfectly still. He hadn't been seen in town in years, and like Aloy, his name carried weight, though in a much quieter, more dangerous way. His face was sharp and weathered, and his eyes didn't blink as he watched Aloy step into the auction house office with Maelys Fortier. Osric lit a cigarette with practiced ease, never taking his eyes off the building. Frostmane stood just outside, tied loosely, his coat catching the fading sunlight like bronze. "So, you finally showed up," Osric muttered under his breath. Inside, Maelys sat in silence as Aloy's fingers moved slowly along the rim of the water glass. She wanted to ask him everything, where he had gone, why he left, why now, but she waited. He stared at the desk for a long time before finally speaking. "I wasn't hiding," he said. "I was surviving." Maelys furrowed her brow. "Surviving what?" Aloy looked up at her, and for a moment she saw something in his expression. Guilt, exhaustion, and a truth he still wasn't ready to share. "There are things out there you don't walk away from easily," he added, cryptically. Back outside, Thibaut Carrière was circling Frostmane like a vulture. $10,000 for this beat-up animal," he scoffed. "You know that ain't right." Gaëtan Rousseau gave him a warning look. "Doesn't matter what you think, Thibaut. The bid was legal. It's done." But Thibaut wasn't just angry, he was rattled. He had history with Aloy. Unfinished business. And something about seeing him again brought old tensions to the surface. "He's not back here for nothing," Thibaut muttered. "And when he starts talking, people wish he'd stayed gone." In her quiet voice, Maelys finally asked, "Why now, Aloy? After all these years?" He hesitated before answering. "Because someone else is still out there. Someone who knows the truth. I needed to be sure he was still watching before I stepped back into the light." Maelys's heart quickened. "Who?" Aloy didn't say. But outside the window, Osric leaned back in his seat, the smoke from his cigarette curling up toward the roof of the cab. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the property, the wind picked up, rustling the loose hay and creaking the barn doors. Frostmane let out a low, throaty exhale, not from fear, but from recognition. Somewhere nearby, an old enemy had returned. Or maybe he'd never left. The wind had settled, but the air was heavy with something unspoken. Frostmane stood near the edge of the auction yard, ears twitching, head slightly tilted toward the fading sun. Though the years had carved lines into his body, there was still a sharpness in his posture, like a soldier returned from war who never truly relaxed. Behind his eyes there was memory. And the moment Osric Dunleavy stepped out of his truck, even without a word, Frostmane's entire body shifted. Not fear, not aggression. Recognition, laced with unease. Inside the office, Aloy Tremblay paused mid-sentence. He didn't hear Osric's steps. He felt them. Maelys noticed the change in his posture, how his shoulders tensed, how his fingers curled slightly as if bracing for impact. "He's here, isn't he?" Aloy asked without looking up. Maelys nodded slowly, unsure how he knew. "A truck pulled up 20 minutes ago. We didn't recognize it, but, yeah, he's here." Aloy stood, walking to the window, peeking through the blinds just enough to see Osric lighting another cigarette. "That man," Aloy muttered, "was once like a brother to me." Outside, Osric approached Frostmane with slow, deliberate steps. He didn't reach out to touch the horse. He simply stood a few feet away, staring into the animal's eyes. "You remember, don't you?" he whispered. "You always saw more than the rest of us." Frostmane didn't move, but his breath quickened. Osric smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Yeah, you remember what happened that night." Behind him, Thibaut Carrière, still bitter from losing the bid, observed Osric with curiosity. He didn't trust Aloy, but he trusted Osric even less. Meanwhile, Aloy sat back down across from Maelys. "There was a fire," he said finally. "Not in the barn. In the woods behind the property. 20 years ago." His voice dropped. "Frostmane saw it, heard it, ran straight into it." Maelys's eyes widened. "Was that the night you disappeared?" Aloy nodded. "It wasn't an accident. And it wasn't meant for me. But I saw something I wasn't supposed to. And Frostmane, he never forgot." Down in the yard, Gaëtan was helping prepare the paperwork to transfer Frostmane to Aloy officially. But he paused as he noticed Osric walk away from the horse and head straight toward the office. There was no urgency in his step. Just cold purpose. He didn't knock. He didn't call out. He just opened the door. And when Aloy looked up and saw him, 20 years of silence collapsed into a single word, "Osric." For a long moment, no one spoke. The door swung slowly shut behind Osric Dunleavy, clicking into place like a lock. The silence inside the office was suffocating. Aloy Tremblay stood across the room, eyes locked on the man who, years ago, he would have trusted with his life. Now every inch between them felt like a fault line, a thin strip of ground above something volatile, something long buried. Maelys Fortier didn't move. Her instincts told her this wasn't the time to speak. Osric was the first to break the silence. "You look older," he said flatly. "But not dead." Aloy narrowed his eyes. "That's rich, coming from you." A small, bitter smile pulled at the corners of Osric's mouth. "So what now? You came back for Frostmane? For closure?" His tone was mocking, but beneath it there was something else, caution. He wasn't sure what Aloy knew, or what he remembered. "I came back because it's time," Aloy replied. "We can't outrun that night forever." Outside, Frostmane paced in his pen. He was unsettled, his hooves kicking small clouds of dirt, ears flicking. Gaëtan Rousseau, watching from a distance, noticed it. "That horse knows something," he murmured. Thibaut Carrière, leaning against a fence post nearby, chuckled. "Please. It's a horse, Gaëtan. Not a detective." But even Thibaut didn't sound sure. The whole town had grown up hearing fragments of what happened that night. None of them had ever heard the full story. Maybe no one had, until now. Inside, Maelys finally spoke, her voice steady. "If you both have something to say, then say it. Stop circling like wolves." Aloy's jaw tensed. The fire in the woods, it wasn't just a fire. There was a shipment. Something illegal. Hidden in the trees. I didn't know until Frostmane spooked and ran off course. Osric didn't deny it. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "You weren't supposed to see it. You weren't supposed to be there at all." Aloy took a step forward. "And when I did see it, you tried to make sure I never came back." Maelys gasped softly, eyes darting between them. "You're saying—" "He left me to burn," Aloy interrupted, his voice shaking. "He lit the fire and walked away, thinking I was inside." Osric didn't flinch. "I thought you were already gone," he said quietly. "I didn't check. That was my mistake." The room fell silent again, but now the air was charged, like the moment before a storm cracks open the sky. And somewhere outside, Frostmane let out a long, echoing whinny, as if remembering it all, too. Maelys Fortier stood frozen between two men who once shared blood as brothers, not by family, but by bond. Now, that bond lay in ruins, scorched by betrayal and silence. Aloy Tremblay's voice still echoed in the office, and though the room had gone quiet again, the weight of what had just been said was unbearable. Maelys could see it in both their eyes, the pain of what was lost and the fear of what would come next. Osric leaned against the wall, arms still crossed, but his fingers trembled ever so slightly. "I didn't want it to go that way," Osric finally said. "But you saw something that could have ruined everything. You were loyal until you weren't." Aloy shook his head, his voice sharp. "Loyalty? I was loyal to the truth. You were loyal to greed." His words hit like a slap, and for a moment Osric's gaze dropped. "I tried to clean it up," Osric muttered. "I thought if I buried it all, the fire would erase it." Aloy stepped forward, eyes burning. "You didn't bury the truth. You buried me." Outside, Frostmane had stopped pacing. He stood perfectly still, ears perked, head turned toward the office. His stillness caught the attention of Gaëtan Rousseau, who instinctively quieted the others around him. "Something's happening," he whispered. Thibaut Carrière, still watching with arms crossed, narrowed his eyes. "What exactly do you think that horse is reacting to?" Gaëtan didn't answer. Deep down, he felt what many there refused to believe, that Frostmane had always known. He had witnessed the truth when no one else had. Back inside, Maelys sat down slowly, her legs weak. "All these years," she whispered. "Aloy, we held vigils. Your daughter cried herself to sleep for months. People blamed themselves. And you stayed away?" Aloy's face softened for the first time. "I was injured, lost. I lived off the grid, in the mountains. I didn't know if I could come back. Not until I knew Osric would be here to face what he did." His voice cracked on the last word. "I couldn't leave Frostmane behind. He came back to me. And when he did, I knew it was time." Osric turned to leave, but paused at the door. "You think the past will forgive you, Aloy?" he asked, voice low. Aloy didn't answer. Instead, he looked out the window, where the sun had begun to set behind the hills. Shadows stretched long across the earth, and among them, one in particular began moving closer to the barn. Calik Nanuk had arrived. The last light of day slipped behind the hills as Calik Nanuk stepped from the shadows. He moved with quiet precision, every footstep purposeful, as if the earth itself recognized him. His coat was thick and weathered, his long black hair tied at the back, and his eyes, calm but piercing, scanned the barnyard like someone returning to a grave he never wanted to visit. Few in town knew his full story, but those who did spoke of him with both respect and distance. He had once lived deep in the Alaskan interior, before the fire changed everything. Éloi Tremblay, still standing by the window, felt Calik's presence before he saw him. "He's here," he murmured. Maelys Fortier turned toward him. "Who is he?" Éloi didn't answer right away. He watched Calik approach Frostmane, who had not moved since Osric entered the office. The horse, sensing something familiar, lowered his head gently as Calik placed a hand between his eyes. It was not a greeting, it was recognition, deep and ancient. "He was there that night," Éloi said softly. "He saw it all." Outside, Thibaut Carrière was growing restless. Another ghost from the past? He scoffed, stepping toward the yard. Gaëtan Rousseau held him back with a look. Let him be. Calik whispered something to Frostmane in a language no one else understood. The horse gave a single soft snort, not startled, not afraid, as if affirming whatever had just been said. Calik then turned his gaze toward the barn office, eyes locking onto the window. On the other side, Aloy didn't blink. When Osric Dunleavy opened the door and stepped out, he stopped dead in his tracks. He hadn't seen Calik in 2 decades, and the sight of him now clearly unsettled him. "You shouldn't be here," Osric said, louder than he meant to. Calik didn't respond. He simply stood there, unmoving. The silence stretched. Then, in a voice quiet but steady, Calik said, "I saw what you buried. Not just Aloy, not just the fire. All of it." Osric's jaw tensed, his fists clenching at his sides. The mask was cracking. Inside, Maelys looked to Aloy. "Is he here to help you?" Aloy's eyes didn't leave the scene unfolding outside. "He's not here for me," he said. "He's here for the truth." Maelys swallowed hard, suddenly realizing how deep this went, that what happened 20 years ago wasn't just personal. It was criminal. And it wasn't just about Aloy surviving. It was about what was stolen, and what Calik had come to reclaim. The night had fallen completely, and the yard was now lit only by the soft glow of hanging barn lights and the pale halo of the moon. The quiet around them was not peaceful. It was the stillness of something about to shatter. Osric Dunleavy stood at the edge of the yard, breathing heavily, eyes locked on Calik Nanuk. Behind them, Frostmane shifted his weight, ears twitching, tail flicking at the air. He felt the energy, the tension, the truth pressing against the night like a scream that had yet to be released. "You think anyone's going to believe you?" Osric spat, stepping closer to Calik. "You've been gone for decades. You're nobody here." Calik didn't move. "I don't need to be anybody. I only need to speak." Éloi Tremblay, now standing in the doorway behind them, raised his voice. "You buried something out there, Osric. We both know it. And now someone else does too." Osric turned to him, eyes wide with rage. "Don't start preaching. You left too. You hid while I cleaned up your mess." Maelys stepped out of the office, her voice trembling but loud. "This isn't just about the fire, is it?" She looked between them all. This was something bigger, something planned. Aloy nodded. Smuggling routes. Cargo coming in through the woods. The fire was a cover-up when things went wrong. I stumbled into it, and they tried to silence me. His voice cracked. I wasn't the only one. There was another man that night. Calik saw it. Calik's expression didn't change, but his silence spoke louder than anything. The crowd had grown. Neighbors, townsfolk, ranchers, all drawn by the voices, the rumors, the presence of men thought long gone. Thibaut Carrière, now looking far more uneasy, backed away slowly, realizing how far this might go. Gaëtan Rousseau crossed his arms, face grave. "If this is true," he muttered to no one in particular, "someone's going to prison. Maybe more than one." Osric turned in a slow circle, eyes scanning the watching faces. His past, once hidden so well, was closing in from every side. "I did what I had to do," Osric growled, as if justifying it to himself. "No one was supposed to get hurt." "But someone did," Calik said. "And you left him for dead." Osric took a step toward Frostmane, not toward the men, but the horse let out a sudden, fierce snort and stamped the ground, refusing his approach. It was no longer just a memory. The past had come home, and it wasn't leaving quietly. For a long moment, no one dared to speak. The silence wasn't empty. It was heavy, charged, like the air just before lightning strikes. Osric Dunleavy stood at the center of the barnyard, surrounded by ghosts he thought he'd buried. Aloy Trembley, alive and unbroken. Calik Nanuk, quiet but unwavering. And Frostmane, the living witness to it all. The people of the town, gathered in an unspoken circle, waited. What they'd just heard wasn't rumor anymore. It was confession. Aloy stepped forward, eyes locked on Osric. "You left me to die in those woods," he said, his voice low, but the emotion behind it shook even the stillest hearts. "You set the fire. You ran. But Frostmane didn't. He found me. He dragged me to the river with a rope still tied to his saddle. That horse saved my life." A murmur ran through the crowd. Maelys, standing to the side, pressed a hand to her mouth. Even Thibaut Carrière, ever skeptical, looked shaken. Osric's face cracked. His arrogance, so carefully held for years, slipped away like ash in the wind. "I thought it was over," he whispered. "I thought if no one ever asked questions, it would fade." Calik finally stepped forward, his voice steady. "You thought wrong. There was a body in that fire. Not Aloy's. Someone else. Someone you didn't expect to be there." That revelation froze Osric in place. He looked at Calik, his expression shifting from denial to dread. "The man who helped you bring the shipment in, he wasn't just a driver, was he?" Calik asked. "He was family. A cousin? A brother." Osric's shoulders dropped. "He wasn't supposed to be there," he muttered. "He came early. I didn't know." Now the pain in his eyes was real. "I lit the fire thinking the place was empty." The crowd fell silent again. What once looked like malice now looked like a lifetime of guilt rotting from the inside. Aloy didn't move. "You could have told the truth. You could have faced it then. But instead, you let me disappear. You let my daughter believe I was dead. You let this horse wander for years, scarred and broken." Osric collapsed to his knees in the dirt. "I was a coward," he admitted. "I still am." The only sound was the distant rustling of wind through dry grass and Frostmane's slow, steady breathing. Calik turned to Aloy. "Now they all know," he said quietly. "But it's your choice what comes next." And for the first time in 20 years, Aloy Trembley looked truly free. Morning light crept slowly across the barnyard, casting long shadows over the dust and broken silence of the night before. Aloy Trembley stood by the fence, one hand resting on the weathered wood, the other gently stroking Frostmane's mane. The horse leaned into the touch, calm and still. They had both carried their wounds for too long, some visible, others buried deep. But now, for the first time in 2 decades, neither of them looked over their shoulder. Behind them, Osric Dunleavy sat alone in the back of a sheriff's cruiser, hands cuffed, head bowed. He hadn't fought the arrest. He hadn't said a word since the confession. As the deputy closed the door, Maelys Fortier watched from the porch, arms folded. Her expression wasn't one of vengeance, but of sadness. It was over. And yet, some things would never be whole again. Closure doesn't fix everything. But it's a beginning. Inside the barn, Calik Nanuk helped Gaëtan reorganize what was left of the auction. Tools were returned to shelves. Chairs were stacked. People had gone home, quiet and thoughtful. Calik paused beside Frostmane's old stall, placing a hand against the wood. He whispered something in his native tongue, words meant only for the past. Then he turned to leave, disappearing into the road without fanfare, as if he had only come to close a door no one else dared to open. Later that afternoon, Aloy stood alone beneath a tree near the edge of the property. He held a letter in his hand, creased, aged, worn from being read too many times. It was written by his daughter years ago, when she still believed he was alive. Her handwriting was shaky, childlike. "If you're out there, come home. I still need you." He closed his eyes and breathed deeply. He had missed birthdays, holidays, first steps and final recitals. But maybe, just maybe, there was still time for something. Back in town, word spread. The truth had been revealed, and for many, it reopened old questions. But it also brought peace. The stories that had haunted late-night conversations and back-porch whispers now had an ending. And that ending didn't belong to mystery. It belonged to memory, and to the ones who survived it. Frostmane remained with Aloy, no longer just a relic of the past, but a bridge to whatever future still lay ahead. As the sun dipped once more below the hills, casting its final glow across the field, Aloy saddled Frostmane gently. "Let's go," he whispered. "Not to escape this time. Just to live." And with that, horse and man rode quietly into the horizon, not to forget what happened, but to finally be free from it.